There's a distraction. There's a distraction. There's a law that just got passed for a banning for something with transhumanism. So let's get into it. This is something else, but there's a distraction. I'll come back later.
Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. We continue following that shocking breaking news out of New York City. You see the flashing lights there behind me on that Manhattan street? That's because murder happened there. A manhunt now underway after a targeted attack on United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, shot and killed outside a Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. So here's what we know so far. NYPD says it appears the gunman was, quote, lying in wait for several minutes outside that hotel. As Thompson walked up to the building, the gunman approached him from behind, shot him in the back, then in the leg, and took off. Thompson was not robbed. Police do not have a motive. United Healthcare security and investigators now combing through files for any possible threats and disgruntled, recently fired employees to try to figure out why somebody would do this just before the sun comes up. Now, police say the gunman took off on a city e-bike. But this is a photo we just got in, caught on surveillance video of the gunman standing there outside of a black SUV, backpack on his back and a gun pointed. He then got on that bike, headed to Central Park, where he was last seen on Center Drive, if you know that part of Central Park. Police add that he was last seen wearing a black mask over his face, brown or cream jacket, black and white sneakers, and then that gray backpack you see there. New York's police chief spoke about what investigators know at this point. We wanted to let you hear that.
It appears the suspect was lying in wait for several minutes. And as the victim was walking to the conference hotel, the suspect approached from behind, striking the victim at least once in the back and at least once in the right calf. Many people passed the suspect, but he appeared to wait for his intended target. The suspect fled, first on foot, then on an e-bike, and was last seen in Central Park on Center Drive early this morning. The victim was removed to Roosevelt Hospital, where he was pronounced. We've been in touch with his family, his friends, and his colleagues, and they are very much in our thoughts and prayers. Investigative efforts of the New York City Police Department are well underway, and we will not rest until we identify and apprehend the shooter in this case.
Brian Thompson led United Healthcare, which is one of the nation's largest health insurers. More than 100,000 employees. Chances are many of you listening right now have United Healthcare. He became chief executive officer back in April of 2021. And before that, he headed up the company's government programs, including Medicare and retirement divisions. CBS News senior coordinating producer Anna Schechter is in Manhattan. Anna, what a shock this is. Police saying this was not a random attack. What can you tell us about that shooting and then those moments right after?
That's right, Reed. Well, you just heard New York City Police Commissioner Tisch describe how he was lying in wait, essentially standing behind a vehicle, waiting while people passed by, and he was aware, according to our senior sources in the NYPD, that he was staying in a nearby hotel across the street at the Marriott, and so he was waiting for him to walk over to that Hilton Hotel where the investor conference was taking place, and he was well positioned to be hidden, walk around that car, and then shoot him from behind. Investigators say they recovered 3 casings at the crime scene, so we know he shot at least 3 times. It's unclear if there was a silencer used. They're still investigating that, but at one point the gunman had to fix a jam in the gun, so it really looks like this the assassin was well prepared for this killing, and he successfully fled using the Central Park as his cover, and essentially NYPD lost trace of him. The last known video of him is riding a bike on Center Street, as you said, which is inside Central Park, and investigators are now begging the public for information because he is still at large. Reed.
Any idea on a motive for this shooting coming up there in the Big Apple?
Well, we've seen reports that he had been receiving some kind of threats, according to his family, in recent days and months. But the CEOs of these kinds of massive corporations, that is not necessarily out of the ordinary, and it wasn't enough to trigger a security detail to follow him from his home in Minnesota to New York. It appears he came on his own, checked into the Marriott Hotel, was planning to attend this conference, likely was a speaker at the conference. Given his role, he rose up the ranks over 20 years at the company, so he was well known to the people who were there at the conference. And so all of that is going to factor into this investigation that is ongoing. Investigators are on the scene. They also recovered a cell phone that was found in an alleyway nearby, and they are doing the forensics on that to see if that might belong to the suspect, but still so many questions unanswered, Reed.
Somebody knew something, and more information to come. This will command dinner time headlines. Anna Schechter, thank you so much for that conversation. CBS News 24/7 also watching closely something happening at the U.S. Supreme Court as we speak. Justices in session hearing arguments in a Tennessee case that bans gender-affirming care for minors. Now, that law prohibits puberty blockers and hormone treatments in an effort to regulate the lives of transgender people, especially young people. CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford joins us live. Jan, there's history being made here. Is this case seen as having major national consequences?
You know, Reed, I think you're right on both counts. This is, first of all, an historic case. It's the biggest case of the term. There's an enormous crowd gathered here. We've kind of got competing rallies. People camped out for days to try to get a seat inside the courtroom. And yes, it has huge national implications. Laws in 26 states potentially are at issue that ban or restrict this kind of sex transition treatment for minors like the state of Tennessee does. It also represented the first time that a trans attorney has argued before the Supreme Court. Chase Strangio, representing the ACLU, appeared before the justices today to argue against these state bans on trans-identified medical treatments. So, at any rate, big day, like you said, and the justices spent over 2 hours grappling with the complicated issues in this case. Bottom line, though, Reed, I think they are really resistant to arguments that lower court got it wrong. Remember, a lower court ruled that these bans were permissible, citing that essentially some of the evidence and the research was so unclear. These are novel treatments done recently in the last 5 to 10 years, that states were within their powers of regulating medicine to restrict it. That's what the Biden administration argued against today, and Mr. Strangio for the ACLU. And I believe, based on the arguments and the questions, they had a pretty hard road ahead of them. There were at least 5 justices who seemed very skeptical of those arguments, very concerned about expanding the court's power in some of these cases, because as the Chief Justice pointed out, as Justice Brett Kavanaugh pointed out, this is kind of unclear, and maybe this is best left to the legislative process. So I think right now it looks like these laws in 26 states restricting this kind of treatment are likely to stand.
And Jan, let's talk about this, because we're talking about a Tennessee case, but other states are involved too. What can you tell us about the involvement of other states before we let you go? We know you have a busy day getting ready for nightly news.
No, and it's great to talk to you because we literally just got out of the courtroom, so you're getting it first, Reed. But there's 26 states that ban or restrict this kind of care, and then reflecting the deep divisions in this country, another 14 states specifically allow it. So this case wouldn't affect those. It still would remain the law in those states where children could still get this kind of treatment. But it would, if the court upholds this Tennessee law banning the care, that would mean that the laws in the 25 other states also would still remain on the books. And that, of course, is going to affect potentially hundreds of thousands of children who are identifying as trans. So obviously these are very difficult issues, and the court really grappled with that. And again, it seems like what a majority of the justices right now are inclined to do based on their questions, and I have to say a caveat, Reed, they can always surprise you,
sure.
But based on their questions, it appears they believe that this is something right now that's best left to the states to decide. Now, why does that sound familiar? That's exactly what the court ruled when it overturned Roe versus Wade, a landmark case that it said was never in the Constitution, and that issue of abortion was best left to the states and the state legislatures and the people's representatives to decide. I think it is highly unlikely that a court that overturned Roe versus Wade and sent that issue of abortion back to the states is likely here to say states on this issue of transgender medical care for children cannot make those decisions for themselves. Reed?
Well, and then looking forward to potentiality where marriage equality is concerned. Jen Crawford, there are many things that you and I could be talking about, but I know you're having a very busy day there. We appreciate. Go ahead.
I don't think that's an issue. I don't think that's an issue. The one other thing I would point out, the court looks to be looking at this very narrowly. And even if Tennessee wins in this case, Justice Barrett, a conservative, for example, who voted to overturn Roe versus Wade, said there are other issues that the trans parents could raise in other lawsuits, saying parental rights are at stake, that they should be able to have the choice, make the choices for their children's health care. So I think the decision would be very narrow. I don't believe, and the opinion, the argument itself didn't have that kind of soaring rhetoric. This is going to be narrowly decided.
Jen Crawford, thank you so much. You have my thanks on television and also in a direct message in your Instagram account. We appreciate it. We want to very quickly get to something that's happening also in Washington, D.C. Pete Hegseth is speaking right now on Capitol Hill amidst so many allegations. Let's go ahead and listen.
All the questions you guys would like to ask.
Only if it's not really your job to do this job, sir.
Well, that's what happened. Now listen.
You know, our founders are brilliant in this consent. It's been edifying and a wonderful process to go through and meet with senators and talk to them, especially members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, whose passion is the Defense Department, and our warfighters, to hear what they want to do to make sure that department is properly oriented for the threats of the world and make sure that we're putting the warfighters first. That's what Donald Trump asked me to do. Your job is to bring a warfighting ethos back to the Pentagon. Your job is to make sure that it's lethality, lethality, lethality. Everything else is gone. Everything else that distracts from that shouldn't be happening. That's the message I'm hearing from senators in that advising consent process. It's been a wonderful process. As far as everything else, I had a chance to sit down with Megyn Kelly today for an hour. I refer you to that interview. She asked probably all the questions you guys would like to ask.
And he's making us mindful. Scott McFarland bringing you in, CBS News congressional correspondent, that Pete Hegseth also is a television professional because he ended his comments with a tease to a media interview. I want to ask you right off the top, though. Senator Josh Hawley mentioned in some sound that we played earlier on this broadcast that Pete Hegseth had canceled a meeting planned for tomorrow. How do you read that? Because Hawley's a friendly.
Yeah, you have Pete Hegseth right there, right then, trying to pronounce his candidacy healthy and strong and vibrant, but there's all these symptoms of problems in his candidacy. Meetings getting canceled. Josh Hawley told me he's not even sure why the meeting has been canceled. That was actually for later today. You have ardent Trump supporters in the U.S. Senate now very much equivocating about whether Pete Hegseth has the support he needs, whether more answers are needed about the accusations in his past. These are senators who not only have been devoted to Donald Trump, but who previously this week were more strident in their support of Pete Hegseth. That's a problematic sign. Let's take a listen to one of them, Kevin Kramer of North Dakota, speaking with CBS News as the afternoon began.
I'm hoping to hear that he's that these issues, whatever are true, are behind him, and that he's looking forward, not backward, that he's committed to, one of the things I'd love to hear is that he's committed to not drinking. I think if he would, being familiar with the problems of alcoholism and the dumb things we do when we drink too much, it'd be really nice if he would set that one aside for good, if not at least through a term as secretary. And then, as much as anything, I want to hear about his plans for the agency, how he, what he'd like to do to reform it, what his vision is for becoming a stronger military, a greater deterrent, the geopolitics of the geopolitical advantages of being an American with a big stick, and to be honest, that's what I'm most interested in.
And Reed, the other symptom that there's a problem is that we're starting to hear reports about backup plans, be it Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. There's other names being bandied about here on Capitol Hill. As soon as they start talking about a backup plan, it weakens the nominee and his efforts to secure the position.
Striking to me that that representative that CBS News talked about was most concerned about Hegseth committing to not drinking amidst so many other allegations. But, you know, we've seen sort of this same dynamic play out with Matt Gaetz. And then 24 hours after Matt Gaetz said everything's fine, he felt appreciative of the senators, then, of course, that famous announcement that he was going to withdraw from consideration. Speaking to that question of weakening Hegseth's position, his mother was on Fox News earlier today. She was sort of walking back some of the statements that she made to her own son in that widely reported email. Tell me about what your sense of whether her walking back those comments really helped to shore up her son's arguments to senators today.
That was untraditional, to have your own mother make a media appearance in your defense. Her going on Fox News was not by happenstance. She puts her message right there into the echo chamber a lot of these Republican senators consume all day, and a lot of their base constituents consume all day. So not an inconsequential place for her to go. But here's the bottom line, based on what Pete Hegseth just said, Reed. He was making an argument, in his words, about lethality, about the military forces changing posture or increasing their devotion to Donald Trump's priorities. Matt Gaetz and Pete Hegseth were not getting protests here because of their policy stances or their policy positions. It was over personal stuff. And if senators are going to defy Donald Trump, they're not defying Donald Trump on his ambitions and his policy prerogatives. They'd be defying him on issues of a personal matter involving his would-be nominees. That's much different. It's a much different way to defy the president-elect of your own party.
And while we have you, shifting gears here, we just got the final House results. Republicans win 220 seats, Democrats win 215 seats. So what does this mean for House Democrats as they face an incoming Trump administration?
All right, we've all had our lunch. We can do some math together. We're ready for it. 220 to 215. That's going to shrink. The number is going to go smaller on the right side of your screen. Two of those 220 have been chosen by Trump to join his administration. They seem locks for confirmation. Matt Gaetz is not taking his seat among those 220 in January. It's actually 217 to 215 for the first 100 days of Trump's presidency. You know what that margin is? That's not a margin. 217 to 215 means Republicans can't lose even one vote to the other side. That would make a tie. Things would fail. If any one House member can hold up a bill, every one House member is going to be empowered to get what he or she wants. That's a troubling fortune for the Republican majority in the House, and ultimately could be for Donald Trump's agenda.
You and I did not get into sports broadcasting, but more and more as we talk politics, it seems like maybe we should have gotten a little more sports training. What a game this is. Scott McFarland, as always, great to talk to you there on Capitol Hill. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is in West Palm Beach, Florida, with more on the latest twist out of Mar-a-Lago. Always great to talk to you. So Hegseth holding firm. It seems like he is still doubling down, feeling like he wants to go towards confirmation hearings. He also quoted a conversation that he had with the president-elect, who encouraged him, at least in his own quoting, to dig in his heels and fight.
Right. And so I think what we're watching now is to see whether he has embarked on a 24 or 48-hour spate of image rehabilitation efforts before throwing in the towel by speaking to some friendly outlets, or if he really is digging in and staying in the fight, especially in light, Reed, of these new reports that CBS News has confirmed that the president-elect is now considering others for this position. He's looking beyond Pete Hegseth, and among the bold-faced names who are potentially in the running are Ron DeSantis, the governor of this state, governor of Florida, and Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, who like DeSantis, is a veteran.
All right, so let's go forward into that narrative that Ron DeSantis is being looked at, to put it mildly, by the president-elect. That would shake up Florida politics, no?
That would be big news. You know, in some ways, DeSantis has a similar profile to Hegseth. They're both veterans. In DeSantis's case, he is a Navy veteran. He was a Navy lawyer. He served in Iraq. He won a Bronze Star. Unlike Hegseth, he has experience running a large, complicated bureaucracy because he is running the state of Florida right now. Hegseth doesn't have that experience. Unlike Hegseth, he's also been pretty thoroughly vetted because he ran for president. So there probably isn't anything about Ron DeSantis that could come out and surprise Republican senators over the coming weeks or months because, his whole life is sort of out there already. And the American public knows a lot about him. And finally, I'll say he did serve in Congress, so he is known to senators that way as well. The big question, of course, is he interested in the job? Does he even want it? Does he want to leave Florida? His team hasn't responded to these reports at all, so we really don't know what he's thinking or if the president-elect would really pull the trigger at the end of the day.
Well, and if that job opening comes up, Matt Gaetz is always without a job. Fascinating times. Okay, so while we have you, interesting to look at this. President-elect Donald Trump rolling ahead with nominees. He announced 3 today. Let's go through those while we have you, Nancy. Peter Navarro for senior counselor for trade and manufacturing, Daniel O'Driscoll for Secretary of the Army, and Jared Isaacman for administrator of NASA. Any standouts there?
Well, I think the Peter Navarro pick is pretty interesting. I mean, this is someone who was just released from federal prison back in July after serving 4 months for contempt of Congress connected to the congressional investigation into the January 6th insurrection. He is a longtime loyalist of President Trump, served in the first administration. He is a big proponent on tariffs, which is part of the reason he's so close to Trump, because he and the president-elect see eye to eye on that issue. So he'll be advising Trump on those issues. He'll be making the case publicly for big new tariffs. But he sees eye to eye on a lot of things with the president-elect. He was a big proponent of the false stolen election claims. He even came up with a plan to have the election results overthrown by Congress. So he is someone who has stood by President-elect Trump through thick and thin, and that's why he's going to be returning to the fold.
Nancy Cordes, always great to talk to you. If only political waters could be as smooth as the waters behind you there in Florida. Cafecito on me, my friend. Nice to talk to you. Okay, when we come back, we're going to get back to Manhattan and that breaking news of a fatal targeted shooting against the man who led United Healthcare. Chances are many of you watching have United Healthcare for your health insurance. That man in command of 100,000 employees now shot dead. There's a manhunt and a murder investigation. We'll take you live to the Big Apple when we come back. When we see it, you see it. We continue following that breaking news on CBS News 24/7. A manhunt now underway after a targeted attack, a murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. He was shot in the back, killed outside a Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. You see the police there, the police tape, the barricade. Here's what we know so far. NYPD says it appears the gunman was, quote, lying in wait for several minutes outside that hotel. As Thompson walked up to the building, the gunman approached him from behind, shot him in the back. Thompson apparently also took a bullet to the leg as he fell. He wasn't robbed, so that wasn't a motive. Police do not really know what the motive could be. United Healthcare security and investigators now comb through files for any possible threats of disgruntled or recently fired employees as they try to figure out a motive here. But expanding the conversation out, who is Mr. Thompson? He led United Healthcare, which is one of the nation's largest healthcare insurers, more than 100,000 employees all over the country. He was named Chief Executive Officer in April of 2021, and before that, he headed that company's government programs for business, including Medicare and retirement sectors. CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleiman is joining us now. Let's talk about what is happening. So they've got a murder investigation on their hands, right? They're going to comb through those records to see who, if anybody, would have been motivated to do that, but also a manhunt. And you've worked extensively with the NYPD. You know how they work.
The NYPD is as good as it gets when it comes to an investigation of a homicide. Also here, what you have is a great deal of video. And the assailant was seen riding this e-bike, this city e-bike, through Central Park. That's the last sighting that we know of at this point in time. New York has an enormous amount of camera coverage. So you've got the surveillance having to do with camera coverage. You also have the fact that he left shell casings there So there is a possibility of DNA. You also know that he is proficient with guns, because at one point it's reported that his gun jammed, and yet he was able to alleviate that jam and continue to shoot. We have learned that there have been threats that have come out against Mr. Thompson, and his poor wife, who at this point, the last thing she needed was to be bothered when she has to be dealing with her family. But nonetheless, she has given a statement, according to the New York Post, that there were threats, and she believed that they came from people involving lack of coverage. Now, that's the preliminary. And as my husband, who was the police commissioner in New York, is wont to say, the first story is never the last story. And the story will develop over time here, probably minute to minute, hour to hour. But I bet my money on the NYPD at any point in time to solve this.
Well, and it begs the question, if that reporting is correct that you cite in the New York Post that there had been threats attributed to his wife, who is now going to have to plan a funeral, why was he not traveling with personal security? He was in charge of a major company, 100,000 employees.
You never know. First of all, we don't know what those threats were, if there were threats, because as I say, the first story is not necessarily the last story.
Right.
But what we do need to find out is if there were threats, were they reported to other people in the company, and should he have been traveling with personal security? There is a great deal of executive security that is available throughout the United States. At the same time, you certainly may have the right to say, oh, these threats don't mean anything. And you might have had them checked out even by your company and found out that they were just threats in the wind. And we'll find out if, in fact, they truly existed.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead, friend.
There is always the reality that any CEO of a healthcare company is always having to deal with the fact that there are going to be plenty of people who have coverage by that healthcare company who are unhappy. However, it is a far cry from being an unhappy healthcare consumer and being someone who becomes as proficient as this shooter was. This is someone who planned this, someone who was laying in wait, someone who actually was also a very good shot.
Something that struck me that I want to ask you about, this happened not far from Rockefeller Center, and we have heard officials in New York say that the tree lighting, the ceremonies, the holiday ceremonies will go on. And yet this person was last seen on an e-bike in Central Park, armed, taking a life, not far away from where he was last seen, or she was last seen. Are you struck as a New Yorker that everything is going to continue there at Rockefeller Center?
Absolutely, everything is going to continue. This is someone who is not a danger to the public at large. This is someone who had a target, and he planned his assault and his killing very, very meticulously. So this is not someone who is like an active shooter who may be considered armed and dangerous, someone who's escaped from a prison who may be armed and dangerous. This is someone who knew what he was doing and had one person in mind. New York is very resilient. New York believes, as we have seen after 9/11, that you must go about your business and continue to go forth if it is safe for the public to do so. Right now, the police commissioner and the mayor have deemed that it is safe, and I certainly believe that they know what they're talking about.
All right, so we're going to take off this hat for a minute and ask that you put on another hat. We're also watching developments very closely as jurors enter day 2 of deliberations in that trial of Daniel Penny, that 26-year-old veteran. He pled not guilty, argues his actions on that subway and that chokehold instance that was fatal were justified. Prosecutors say Penny used too much force for too long when he gripped Jordan Neely, who died by the neck for almost 6 minutes. The jurors are really looking at two very key things here, and you feel like they may go for one over the other. Explain that.
Well, there's always the difficulty that is from either the prosecution or the defense point of view, that when you have two charges which are this close, You have a manslaughter charge, which involves reckless conduct, and you have a criminally negligent homicide charge, which involves negligent conduct. They're really separated almost by a thread. And in each case, the risk that Daniel Penny took while he was acting in this chokehold and how long it was held, the risk has to be unjustifiable and substantial, but it also has to be one of a certain magnitude to reach recklessness. Oftentimes, when there is one count, like the manslaughter count, and nothing beneath it, you might have an acquittal or you might have an easy conviction, depending on the evidence. But when you have this middle charge of criminally negligent homicide, it often happens that jurors, especially if they're out for days, may decide to compromise on a verdict. And if I were the defense, I would be most worried about them coming back with the lesser, with criminally negligent homicide. Keep that in mind also. There's a 4-year penalty for criminally negligent homicide. There's a 15-year maximum penalty for the manslaughter.
CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleiman, thank you so much for a fascinating conversation. I hope to see you back here on CBS News 24/7. Great to talk to you. When we come back, more breaking news. We're continuing to watch our monitors. Just a moment ago, we heard from Pete Hegseth, knee-deep in troubles and controversy as he tries to shore up support on Capitol Hill, while at the same time headlines are hitting that there is a potential replacement in line if Pete Hegseth were to be pulled or were to be stepping out of consideration to lead a major department in the U.S. government. We'll be right back. CBS News 24/7 continues to follow the fallout of President-elect Donald Trump's pick, Pete Hegseth. Hegseth on Capitol Hill today, meeting with Republicans, still going forward as if he is going to go into confirmation hearings. We just got this in a conversation he had with reporters. Listen.
In the Senate today, I had a chance to talk to Leader Thune. You know, our founders are brilliant in this process of advising consent. It's been edifying and a wonderful process to go through and meet with senators and talk to them, especially members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, whose passion is the Defense Department, and our warfighters, to hear what they want to do to make sure that department is properly oriented for the threats of the world and make sure that we're putting the warfighters first. That's what Donald Trump asked me to do. Your job is to bring a warfighting ethos back to the Pentagon. Your job is to make sure that it's lethality, lethality, lethality. Everything else is gone. Everything else that distracts from that shouldn't be happening. That's the message I'm hearing from senators in that advise and consent process. It's been a wonderful process. As far as everything else, I had a chance to sit down with Megyn Kelly today for an hour. I refer you to that interview. She asked probably all the questions you guys would like to ask.
Political reporter Megan Messerly is on the Hill. She joins us now. Megan, a lot to cover there today, but I want to start with what you heard Mr. Hegseth say. He's quoting lawmakers that he's been meeting with behind closed doors as seeing this as a distraction. Do you think that characterization is shared across Washington, D.C.?
I think there's maybe a little bit more nuance going on there. I mean, we've seen this sort of very interesting trajectory play out over the course of Pete Hegseth's pick, and then now to where we are with him meeting with folks on Capitol Hill. Pretty shortly after he was picked, we heard some of these allegations come out about, some of his behavior with women. Now there have been allegations about, his drinking behavior as well. And as we've seen more of that come out, I think we've heard more concerns from Republican senators. And of course, the problem there is, they can only afford to lose so many GOP votes in the Senate for Hegseth to be confirmed. And so that's what we're seeing now is him do this tour of Capitol Hill to try to meet with folks one-on-one who have serious reservations, folks like Senator Joni Ernst, who's expected to be a key vote. But the big question is, will he be able to allay those concerns in these meetings? And he's telegraphing positivity so far. He said he's staying in it, but whether he will remains to be seen. That is ultimately up to him and to the president-elect himself.
Megan, we know you've covered politics for a long time. In battleground state Nevada, you have seen rough and tumble in the halls of legislative bodies. Hegseth, and this news broke here on CBS 24/7 within the last hour, word that he canceled a meeting with Senator Josh Hawley. How do you read that? Because Josh Hawley is a friendly to Hegseth.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much reading of the tea leaves right now. I mean, I think a couple ways to look at that. One, if he decides his time needs to be better spent elsewhere, if he doesn't need to convince Senator Hawley of anything, that's one possible read. We know that he's really trying to make the most of his time on Capitol Hill today. We've even seen him, as we saw in that clip, and as he alluded to with his interview with Megyn Kelly, he's actually been doing media, which in of itself is remarkable for a cabinet pick, because folks have generally been staying out of the spotlight. They've been asked to not do media until they are confirmed or otherwise given permission to. And so I think the fact that you see him out here publicly sort of shows the tenuous position that he's in right now. And this is sort of the make or break of whether he can, get enough folks back on board to be able to make it through the confirmation process.
Well, Senator Richard Blumenthal says that he'd be surprised if we were still talking about Pete Hegseth come Monday. Is that the overall feeling you're getting from lawmakers like Mr. Blumenthal on his side of the aisle?
Yeah, I think that is the overall sentiment. I mean, just as we've seen the number of allegations and stories come out, it does kind of feel like the snowball effect right now. Again, of course, anyone who is trying to predict the future or what President-elect Trump is going to do knows that they have been surprised time and time again. So I don't think anyone knows for sure, but it certainly seems like things are heading in that direction, which is why you've heard more speculation around if it's not Pete Hegseth, who could it be? Would it be Ron DeSantis? Would it be Joni Ernst? Would it be someone else? The fact that all these names are swirling around right now is just a sign of the precariousness of this position.
Megan Messerly, thank you so much. Always great to have a conversation with you here on CBS News 24/7. Well, senators today grilling 5 major airlines over the so-called junk fees costing travelers billions of dollars a year. You thought it was all about Pete Hegseth today. Well, they've got other things to do as well. Executives from American, United, Delta, Frontier, and Spirit Airlines testified before a Senate panel about charging passengers extra for things like having those carry-on bags or picking out a seat. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley pressed Spirit Airlines executive Matthew Klein about those carry-on bag prices. Here's what was said.
Last year, your carry-on bag fees ranged between $15 and $99. That's extraordinary. One person might pay $15, somebody else might pay $99. How do you determine it? Is it based on personal characteristics?
It's
you charge
never
women more?
It's never based on personal characteristics.
You charge minors more?
We do not, sir.
What, just people who are suckers? I mean, how do you do it?
Well, there is a cost to carry any kind of bag.
Yeah, but why do you charge some people more? I understand the cost, and you make clear money's your bottom line. I get that, but why is it that you're charging some people what, triple, quadruple the amount?
Well, the length of the flight should matter in this as well. So
yeah, but that's not the data. What the data shows is we're talking about the same people on the same flight might get charged radically different prices.
That's what you call feet to the fire there in the halls of Congress. CBS News senior transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve joins us live. Chris, clearly that Senate panel came prepared. What did we learn from the hearing?
Yeah, Hawley certainly came in ready to pick a fight there, and really an intense line of questioning from the senator from Missouri. Basically, this Senate report that was prepared by the Democratic majority on this subcommittee for investigations basically raised concerns about the amount of fees that airlines are using, and also expressed concern about the future, the idea that AI could be used to target certain customers who might be more willing or able to pay more for the same service than somebody else. And with particular concern and focus during this hearing on the ultra-low-cost carriers, the Frontier and Spirit Airlines, that sort of have a fee-based for everything beyond the ticket. Senator Blumenthal played a video clip, for example, of a bag going into a bag sizer that clearly fit, and yet still the gate agent was telling the person they were going to have to pay a fee if they wanted to take it on the airplane. And we learned in this report that Spirit and Frontier were basically, in the words of the Senator Blumenthal, paying a bounty to their employees to strictly enforce those baggage rules, which resulted in more people paying fees. Obviously, it's a hot-button issue. Senator Hassan from New Hampshire also hit the airlines very hard on making a commitment that parents and children should always be able to sit together. A couple of the airlines have said that's their policy, but they can't guarantee it on every flight. She said you need to do better.
Well, these are important questions, of course, for the traveling public. But aside from political theater and making great sound bites on television, if I am a traveler going into the holiday season, I want to know if I'll see any changes before I fly before the holiday. What's the timeline? What could happen as a result of these hearings, Chris?
Well, I don't think you're going to see any changes by the holiday season. I think the airline's argument is that, for the most part, certainly American, United, Delta make this point and have gone to great lengths to make their process transparent so you know what fee you're getting before you get to the airport. The ultra-low-cost carriers, there is the potential that some people could end up getting hit with a bag fee at the gate that they may not have expected. But generally speaking, the airlines argue that their fee structure is transparent and that they offer choice, basically. They offer a variety of services and experiences at different price points. If you just want that seat and you're only bringing a backpack, there's a lower fare for that than somebody who wants extra leg room and a checked bag, is their argument. If you're a flyer, I mean, the best thing I think you can do going into booking is do your homework, do your research, make sure you know what you're paying for and what's included when you book.
Chris, while we have you, we've got to ask you about the woman who flew as a stowaway on Delta Airlines, that flight from New York to Paris earlier this week. What do we know about that? How did she get on the plane?
Well, we're learning more from basically security camera video that the TSA has confirmed to CBS News shows her entering the main checkpoint at JFK Terminal 4. She used a lane bypassing an airport employee and got into a lane that's known as the known crew member or KCM lane, which at some point merges with the standard line. She then followed basically a group of people that were getting their IDs checked, followed them through the checkpoint, and then went through the body scanner. In fact, her bag got flagged at screening because it had 2 bottles of water in it. She then proceeded from there to the gate and managed to get on the airplane. We have just confirmed, while I've been sitting here, Reed, that she is on a flight back to the United States. We expect her back in New York this afternoon. We understand that it is very likely police will meet the flight. She will be questioned and may well be arrested by the Port Authority police for basically stowing away on that airplane and circumventing those security procedures at the checkpoint.
That's why I love this broadcast, Chris Van Cleve. When we see it, you see it. Chris able to let us know that developing piece of news from where he sits in Washington, D.C. We appreciate you so much. So let's get back to that breaking news out of New York City, that targeted attack. United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson shot and killed outside a Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. So that bullet squarely in Thompson's back. He also took a bullet to the leg. The leader of that massive insurance company pronounced dead at a hospital in Manhattan. So right now, they've got 2 things on their books today in New York. New York police have a murder investigation. They also have a manhunt. So armies of police are on both of those topics. So here's what we know about the shooter. Seen racing away, wearing a black face mask. Now, as you can imagine, police are scouring surveillance video to trail that shooter's movements. Think about it. Cameras are everywhere in New York City, and they are going to be a prime asset in this manhunt. A law enforcement source told CBS News investigators have video of the actual shooting as it happened. Video, not just still photos. It shows that suspect waiting for Thompson outside the hotel. And we want to show you that image of who police are looking for. You see the hooded sweater there, the backpack that we talked about. On the left, you see the suspect taking off on that bike. So police in Manhattan are wanting these images out there. They want eyeballs all over this. And to really incentivize people looking at that, you see how they're doing it. There is a $10,000 reward for information regarding, in all caps, as they say, a homicide. So let's go live to former NYPD police detective Felipe Rodriguez. Felipe, you know from having that job, you know that title's on your resume, you know what job number one is for those detectives on the ground. I just mentioned this is sort of where it all splits. Part of the army of police goes into a murder investigation. The other part goes into a manhunt. Let's talk about the team on the manhunt first. What's happening?
Well, the most important thing is intelligence, right? So we have to get either physical evidence, be it cell phone records, CCTV. We need to, get in what we call our technical assistance response unit, which is called TARU. They'll come in and help with that aspect. At that moment, we're going to get homicide investigations. We're going to get the detective bureau involved, maybe investigators for major crimes, and they're all going to work in unison together to try to make sure that we get as much information that we can from additional CCTV. And then it's a full press to make sure that we recover any physical evidence. We have right time a cell phone, and we need to find that bicycle. That bicycle is definitely going to have, DNA, which is going to be, one of the prime parts of the evidence in the case.
It occurs to me that there are housing units all around where he was last seen around Central Park. What would the word be from police on anybody who would help this person escape?
You know what? You can't, in this situation, we have a professional assassination. We saw the way the individual was able to wait. Right? So it shows that he had determination. The way he planned his escape route, the manner in which he manipulated that firearm, being a firearms instructor, to clear a couple of jams in such succession and get additional shots out. That goes to show, he's very well versed in the use of firearms. So at this point, it's a full court press. We need to capture this individual as soon as possible.
What do police do? Speaking to the murder investigation, what are some of the first priorities that they have in trying to figure out a motive here?
The motive is, we're already getting information that he might have some threats. So we're going to go, first thing is we need to get his cell phone and try to get that digital forensic evidence to make sure that we have any messages, any videos, anything like that. So we need to download that information as soon as possible because that'll help lead the investigation. And allegedly there was another phone that was recovered from the scene that could have been, part of the individual that committed the assassination. But it was very well planned. In the level of detail, it really was impressive. Something almost out of a movie.
Yeah, somebody knew his whereabouts and, like police said, lying in wait. I have to ask, though, if the reporting that's out there, and CBS News as an organization has not independently confirmed this reporting, but it has hit our knowledge that there are reports that there were threats, like you talked about, to his life.
Correct.
Are you struck that this man, who reportedly had threats against him, was traveling without security? He leads United Healthcare. Healthcare is a controversial subject in and of itself in these United States these days. And he was in charge of 100,000 employees walking across that street in Manhattan without security. Are you struck by that?
I really am. At this level, especially even if the rumor of threats, if you have any director of security that's worth, his salt or his money, you would have to assess that and see, guess what? Even just having an armed driver, make sure that this individual, anywhere with his movements, we know where he's going. The same way the individual was laying in wait, someone might have been able to pick up on that and say, listen, there's something going on over here. I'm just astounded to the fact that a gentleman that's responsible for so many employees, it could have been a disgruntled employee. It could have been someone that maybe lost a loved one due to the fact that, they didn't cover some sort of health care, but he definitely should have had a couple of, executive protection officers, which we call EP in the executive protection business.
And yet it seems like the feeling of police is that this was a targeted murder, a targeted hit, and that there's no threat to the general public. You would get that because we are understanding that the Rockefeller tree lighting is going to go on as planned. If I'm visiting from out of state to the New York area to go to that Rockefeller tree lighting ceremony, I'm wondering, am I safe? As somebody who works with police, are you struck that that show is still going to go on while there's a manhunt, a murderer still on the streets?
The show still will go on. Remember, he was fleeing from the area. At this point, fastest way to get out of the city, believe it or not, would have been jump into Central Park, change clothes, and jump on the subway. But rest assured, the NYPD does an incredible job. We pull up police officers from everywhere. The strategic response group. We have uniformed officers from multiple agencies that we have, and also from the precinct level that will go in and support the tree lighting. Rest assured, you are safe.
Okay, so you really raise an interesting question when you say the fastest way to get away is to go into Central Park, change clothing, and get on a subway. That would speak to planning as meticulous as the front-end planning to go there to lie in wait to murder this very important man. Do you think the planning continues on the back end of this as far as the getaway goes?
definitely, like I said, just from studying and seeing the physical evidence at this time from the CCTV, the way he deployed the firearm, being able to clear that jam, because the weapon did jam at least twice, which is actually good because now we have ammunition or rounds that are left behind. They usually will have a greater amount of DNA. If it's on base, on a database, we'll be able to find it. But at this point, there is a high level of planning. Like I said, 31 years of doing this, it was well planned, well executed.
As a former NYPD police detective, Felipe Rodriguez, one final question. We have about 20 seconds left in the broadcast. When will police get their man? What's your bet?
He was so well planned. This one might take a bit. Like I said, if we'll get him. It's just a fact of matching up cell phone records, DNA. Believe me, we're very good when it comes to finding people.
New York's finest. Felipe, thank you, and thanks to our viewers for watching. Much more on this breaking news story out of Manhattan, the murder of United Healthcare CEO. Thanks for watching.